the future of drones. I'm going to pitch out some ideas. Some is what I think we'll see, and some of is what I just hope to see. And I hope that by putting the ideas out there, maybe DJI and other drone manufacturers will pick up on them, and maybe we'll see them in the future. First of all, most of these are going to be safety related. I think safety is really important to drones because every year, tens of thousands of people are seriously injured or killed by consumer quadcopters. Nobody really gets hurt. Every now and then at a wedding, somebody will just like fly a drone into a bride's face or something, and they'll need a couple of stitches. But for the most part, drones are not hurting people, but oh my God, is everybody scared of them, right? People just think they're going to be taking down airliners and stopping emergency first responders from doing their job and just dropping onto people's heads. And there's just no evidence that this is a problem. You just can't find evidence. In fact, when you search for drone-related injuries and deaths, all you find are the government using drones to kill thousands and thousands of people. That's happening. Consumer quadcopters, it seems fine, especially when you consider things like swimming pools and automobiles and tobacco and alcohol that are actually killing a lot of people and are totally legal and mostly recreational. Drones. Okay, anyway. Here are some things that can improve the safety of drones. And these are going to be critical because the more safety we can build into drones, even though it might not be necessary, the more safety, the more we can get the existing laws loosened up, because so many of the existing laws are around safety and this like even false but perceived fear of drones. And the first that I see is the need for better periphery while you're actually flying. Because right now when you fly, you're looking through the first person view from that camera at the front of the drone. And that's really all you can see. Now, every country pretty much says if you're flying a drone, you have to maintain line of sight with it. But, if you fly drones a lot, that's not always going to be the case. Sometimes it'll just get far enough away that you can't clearly see it. Other times, even if it's only 50 feet away, line of sight might not be quite enough to discern its orientation, or you might not have the depth perception to know if it's 1 feet or 5 feet from an obstacle that it could run into. And a lot of safety issues are caused by drones crashing into things. Like there's famous videos of people flying these things in New York City where they're just crashing into buildings. And even if they can maintain eye contact, and they probably could, it's difficult to know exactly the distance. And looking through the camera, you see this like 28 millimeter view at the front of the camera, but you don't have any vision to your sides or behind you at all. And speaking as somebody who's done some like real estate photography with these things, when you are taking video and stills, you end up kind of scooching to the side and scooching backwards a lot to get everything just lined up right. And I know I've felt the need like, I need to back up a couple of feet to fit this whole building in the frame. And you end up backing into trees or something because you don't have any view behind you. And like I said, the line of sight thing is BS. Just because you can see it doesn't mean you know exactly where it is or that you can even see it clearly enough. So what I think we really need is an augmented headset. DJI is planning a headset that you can attach to your head and attach to the controller called DJI goggles. Fat Shark and a couple other companies have headsets. That's a good start. But what we really need is an augmented reality headset that has basically a camera. So you can actually see your surroundings, and maybe it will just pinpoint the location of the drone and give you some information about its orientation, like make it a little arrow. Because once you get past like 50 feet, you can't tell which way these things are facing. And that means the only way to know is to actually like steer it, like push it forward and see, does it go to the left or the right? And if you get much farther out than that, then it just can disappear completely. An augmented headset could give you that first person view, give you potentially a rear view mirror if it had some extra cameras on it, and pinpoint it physically so you could meet the FAA's requirements for maintaining line of sight. Location aware apps. Now, DJI and other manufacturers tend to run apps on the smartphone, and they do have some location awareness. Like my DJI Go app will tell me that I'm in Class D airspace or Class C airspace and warn me about some existing things. It will also notify me that I can't fly over 400 feet, that kind of thing. But they could do a lot more. First of all, they could do much more to notify you of the local laws. So that Mavic Pro there is fantastic for travel. I can just fit it in my backpack and go anywhere. And I just came back from Thailand, and I've taken it to Ireland too, and it's difficult to know what the local laws are. So if I fire it up in another country, it'd be nice if it said, here are the local laws. This drone is over 0.5 kilograms or whatever, and therefore you need this type of license, or you're free to fly in these spaces, but not in these other spaces. I would also like to see this tie in deeper. For example, if I'm flying in a Class C airspace or any airspace, talk directly to local air traffic control. You know, this has a connection to my phone, which has a connection to the internet. So you could tie in and make everybody who might be interested in this aware of my drone's exact location. And okay, I know you're thinking maybe I don't want to tell the government where my drone is at all times. Fine, but this might allow us to loosen up the laws a little bit. If air traffic control could know exactly where every drone was, maybe they'd let us fly up to 500 feet or 800 feet, knowing for sure that there was going to be no airplane coming through there. Maybe they'd be able to say, hey, there is a new obstruction coming through here at 200 feet for some reason. I don't crop dusting or something, and tell you to get the heck out of the way. This sort of intelligence is very feasible. The FAA is working on some things that will allow greater connectivity, but FAA moves real slow. So we need companies like DJI to work on the development and to work with the governments of every different country, unfortunately, to develop some sort of system that will do this. Obstacle avoidance really needs to improve. Like this Phantom 4 Pro here supposedly offers obstacle avoidance in every direction, but the side obstacle avoidance only works in beginner mode, and beginner mode is kind of useless. Like you can't really do much flying in there. And other than that, it has front and back obstacle avoidance, but it's not very good. Like the obstacle avoidance will not detect tree branches. You'll just crash right into a tree. But then other times you'll be trying to fly between, like, say, through a wide doorway, and you'll have plenty of room, but it will just see that there's something 6 feet ahead, and it will just stop, even though you could go. So it's this kind of unintelligent obstacle avoidance. And on this Mavic here, it doesn't even have rear obstacle avoidance. Like I was saying, you can back up, which is frequent, or slide to the side and crash right into things. So we really need working 360 obstacle avoidance that also doesn't throw a lot of false alarms. I even see the obstacle avoidance going off when I'm flying at 200 feet and the skies are clear. Something will just trigger it out of the blue, and it will come to an abrupt halt and screw up my shot or whatever I'm doing. One solution to that is the integration of 3D mapping. Now, we've used a tool called Drone Deploy, which works with your drone, takes over control of your drone, takes a ton of still images of an area, and then creates a cool 3D map. Why not use this mapping technology to create an obstacle avoidance system so that the drone has a 3D map of the area that it's flying in, and it doesn't need to solely rely on radar or vision systems to detect its environment? There are already 3D maps of places like New York City, and in fact, a whole lot of even more rural areas. Google has created 3D maps of, if you could get that data, you could know pretty precisely where every tree and every building is, and that would stop a lot of crashes. And why is this a safety thing? Because drones can crash into a tree or a building and then they fall from there, or they damage property. And these are some of the big concerns that people have. Let's use 3D mapping technology and improve the obstacle avoidance of these drones. You still will need some visual obstacle avoidance in there to tell you about things like, I don't know, a horse that runs in front of it, or some new building that hasn't yet been mapped. Now, these things probably don't have the onboard processing to build these 3D maps in real time, but that's becoming more and more feasible. Companies like Tesla and other companies that are doing automated driving are building these systems using, say, NVIDIA chips that will process this visual feedback and create a 3D map of the surrounding world in real time. So I think in the next few years, it'll become feasible that they will draw 3D maps based on their camera systems. But in the meantime, you could collect 3D maps that other people have made, or if you're going to be flying regularly in an area, you could send a drone up and tell it to make a 3D map so that the next time you fly there, it will already know the area and you won't have to worry about crashing into stuff. Cool, right? I want to see an alarm. If there is a failure and these things start falling from the sky, I want an alarm to beep loudly. Now, there are a couple of different ways this could be implemented. These have speakers in them already. So you could do a software update, and if they detect a failure, they could sound the alarm. Now, of course, that won't work if it's a battery failure, because that would require the regular onboard power. So my suggestion for a more robust system would be to have an independent power supply for the alarm, and in fact have the alarm functioning completely independently to detect a free fall and sound an alarm. The alarm, if somebody's below it, they'll look up and then they can move out of the way. Because when these things make a lot of noise, people will look at them, but if they have total failure, they'll stop making noise, and at that point they're just a silent falling bomb on somebody's head, like those GoPro Karmas, right? Thank goodness nobody's been hurt by those things, but it's possible. I also want to see a controlled descent. Now, one of the scenarios for failure on these things is that one of the props can fail or one of the motors can fail. And at that point, you have an odd number of props going, and that means it's going to basically spin out of control and start to fall. You could handle that more intelligently. I think, what is it? The Typhoon has 6 props, but if one of the props fails, the opposing prop will start to spin forward and backwards so it can maintain its balance. I don't see any reason why you couldn't use that same technology with a quadcopter to keep the drone level like this. Meanwhile, the 2 opposing functional props can continue to spin and provide lift. Now, those 2 props might not be able to keep the drone afloat, but they could start a controlled descent where instead of going into free fall, it falls slower than free fall. And of course, falling slower means it's going to do less damage to whoever's head it lands on. So again, in the event of a failure of one prop, the opposing prop could spin forward and backwards to maintain a relatively level balance, while the 2 opposing functional props slow the descent so that it can make a more safe landing. Passive drag systems. I got this idea from NASCAR, which have roof flaps. Have you ever watched NASCAR? I'm a hillbilly, so I watch NASCAR. And if there's a spin out and the car starts going backwards, it's going to catch air in a direction it doesn't normally receive air. So that air will come up and flip up this roof flap, which acts like air brake. It's a pretty brilliant thing, and it saved a lot of lives in NASCAR, and it can help these things too. If they lose control and they're spinning out of control in a direction they would not normally, like falling upside down, the flaps could deploy and at least slow it down some. Another method of passive drag would be to deploy a parachute. I will say deploying a parachute seems like the obvious solution, but it worries me a little bit because if it were to deploy falsely, the cords could get tangled up in the props and basically initiate a crash. And so I wouldn't want the system to actually cause any damage to a functioning drone, even in the event of some weird failure. But I'll leave that to the engineers to figure out which of those might work better than others. Flimsier props would also greatly improve the safety, because one of the major sources of injury is a prop will hit somebody, say, on their face and actually cause stitches or cause cuts that require stitches. Now, I used to fly single rotor helicopters, remote control helicopters, and you'd start out with these plastic props that would definitely hurt you if they hit you. But at some point you got more serious and you'd put carbon fiber props on there because they'd give you better control. But these carbon fiber props were stiffer, they carried more energy because you could run them faster, and if they hit you, they could kill you. And they did kill some people. The props would hit them in the neck or something and cause profuse bleeding, and that would be it. So that's one of the major safety advantages of quadcopters, is instead of having one big, powerful prop, they have 4 smaller props with lower energy each. So flimsier props that were, say, more bendable, if they struck something, it would be great if the prop broke instead of cracking somebody's skin. Or maybe you put 8 props on there and each of the props carries half the energy and therefore does less damage. Or maybe you surround the props by some sort of safety so that if it whacks into people, it won't hurt them. It's really critical that we eliminate injuries caused by quadcopters, just because the fear of those injuries outweighs the actual damage being done, but the fear of those injuries is preventing us from flying them freely because they're making all these sorts of laws come into place. We need these things to be safe. The next section of suggestions is around the discretion of drones, not for like spying on people, but in particular, the restrictions in the U.S. around flying in the national parks. You can't fly drones in any national parks, or in my experience, in just about any state park. And the reason that park rangers seem to suggest that is because the buzzing of the drones would disturb people. It's a little ironic to me because in the U.S., a big part of the reason national parks exist is because of photographers like Ansel Adams, who succeeded in capturing the beauty and then sharing the beauty of what they saw with other people. And drones are an amazing way to do that, giving you aerial views into the most beautiful parts of our country. Could attract more people there, motivate more people to preserve those beautiful areas and keep those parks alive. But we're not allowed to fly drones in any national park. It's absurd. And again, the reason park rangers cite is because they're buzzy, as if there aren't sources of noise in national parks, right? As if people don't bring their radios when they're picnicking, as if there aren't Harleys going through, as if the landscapers aren't running leaf blowers and lawn. There's plenty of noise in national parks. Drones aren't the biggest part of it. They're not that loud, but that is a concern. So let's make these drones lighter and quieter. Now, these two things will mean that they disturb less people. There are some ways we can do that. We can use lighter weight materials. We could develop some lighter weight batteries. That's probably not in the near future, but simply making them smaller, perhaps without reducing their power and ability to fight the wind, will make them quieter. I also think that there's the opportunity to develop quieter technologies, such as housing the engines a little bit, maybe directing the noise upward instead of just outward in all directions. You know, the military does have a lot of ways to make full-sized helicopters quieter for stealth reasons. So we need to take some of that technology and see if we can build into these consumer things just to reduce the amount of people that we disturb. As far as discretion goes, I'd also like to see the ability to hand launch and land these things. Now, I've hand launched and landed these before because sometimes, well, like I took off from a boat, I got a great shot, and when I came back, the boat was moving around too much for me to really land it. They had a very small space, so I ended up just catching it in my hand and powering it down. But it's not designed for that, especially for one-person operation. So it's a little bit difficult to launch and land by hand. What I'd really like is like switches physically on the drone that will allow me to grab it, and maybe if I push the buttons on both sides with 2 fingers, it'll just immediately power down. I want to just be able to snatch it out of the air. That's in the category of discretion, because right now when you come into land, you need to clear out an area around you. And sometimes you'll take off and there'll be plenty of space, but then maybe people are interested and so they gather around you. Anyway, if I can grab it out of the air, that would make things easier. Same thing for taking off. Finding a place to take off from can be a little bit difficult. Let's talk about ways that drone manufacturers can improve the video that we get out of these things. In particular, I want to see cinematic controls. Right now, the DJI drones give you an option of either flying in like standard mode or sport mode. And here's where you see their legacy as kind of flying toys, in that both of them are kind of designed to give you good control over the drone, but not make good video. And every time I see anybody's drone footage, it looks a little jerky. Same with mine. It's really hard to not get jerky footage. You can deaden the stick some and do that kind of thing, and that helps. But even with deadened sticks, there's always some point when it just shifts too fast. I want a cinematic mode that I can put it in and have everything be nice and smooth. The only way to do that now is to use the app to kind of record multiple waypoints where you tell it, you know, get a shot of this and then move smoothly into this. And you can do that a few different ways and it will get you smooth results. But that requires basically going through everything a couple of times, which means your actual recording time is like tripled or quadrupled. And often you just don't have that time when you're doing a run and gun thing. So give me cinematic sticks. Also, give me a camera with a zoom on it. I don't know why all the major consumer drones are just fixed focal length like a smartphone. Heck, even my iPhone 7 Plus, I can switch between 2 different lenses so I can zoom in 2x with optical zoom. But my drones, I can't do that. They're always just fixed at this super wide angle. And cinematically, that's probably, if you could pick one focal length, that's what you want it to be. But it means that all drone footage looks like drone footage, right? Because we're all at that same angle. And you'd have to upgrade to the DJI Inspire, which means with the camera, you're spending like a minimum of $4 or $5 grand. Give me interchangeable lens cameras on the lower end. For stills, there are some areas that could be improved on these cameras. They're good. And some of my most popular still photos from the last year have been taken with drones just because they can get to places that my DSLRs can't get to. But I want to see higher megapixels. The Phantom 4 Pro is a step in the right direction with its 20 megapixel sensor. But in the DSLR world, I'm pretty much accustomed to like a 50 megapixel sensor. And I'm using these to take landscapes generally. And I love to make big landscape prints. So you don't necessarily have to go with a huge sensor to get a lot of megapixels in. You do need a high quality lens though. I understand. That means the components need to be a little bit beefier. The gimbal needs to be a little bit beefier, but I'd like to see that without, again, having to upgrade to the Inspire. I'd also like to see some intelligent technologies built in, like pixel shift technologies that can move the sensor around to increase the virtual resolution of the sensor. Pentax has an amazing implementation of this. Olympus has an amazing implementation of this. It basically uses a lower resolution sensor but produces high resolution results. That's entirely feasible in a drone, especially because they stay so still when they're flying. Nobody's going to like to hear this, but I really think DJI in particular needs to start working with lobbyists in the US at least to try to get some of these drone laws loosened up a little bit, because when drones started hitting the scene, lawmakers just decided we just need to just ban these everywhere we can. They're scary. I don't know what's going on. DJI needs to work with these lobbyists, show them that they're addressing the various safety concerns, and free photographers and filmmakers up to use these devices creatively for fun, to appreciate the environment around us, and to generally make the world a better place. They have amazing potential, but the restrictions on them right now are unjustified and ridiculous. So we need lawyers out there working hard to change these things for us, and that will just make the entire experience much more enjoyable for us. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. What do you think needs to change? What are the biggest challenges and how do we overcome them? And maybe let DJI engineers know that we had some ideas here. Subscribe to see more stuff, reviews, tutorials, lots of photography stuff and drone stuff. Bye.